Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 31. The Minnesota State Fair, the Great Minnesota Get-Together, was supposedly the largest 12-day fair in the country, with an attendance of nearly 2 million people. It was also one of the most tacky events on the face of the earth, featuring combines and tractors, chickens, rabbits, gargantuan swine, pop stars from Bonnie Raitt to Winona Judd, fireworks, roller coasters, and a riot of food from deep-fried cheese curds to corn dogs and fried ice cream on a stick. Not to mention a semi-truck of all-you-can-drink milk. Todd had gone nearly every year since he'd moved to Minnesota, and oddly, like so many gay men, always ended up at the Dairy Pavilion with its butter sculptures of Princess Kay of the Milky Way and her smiling attendants, which he thought said a lot about gay stereotypes. Turning off of Snelling Avenue, Todd drove through the green and blue entry gates that only 3 or 4 weeks ago were swarming with pedestrians. Pushing to get in, he headed directly up one of the main boulevards, finding not a mass of people, but a huge deserted street lined on either side with food shacks, now boarded up for the year. Where recently upward of 200,000 people had strolled each day, there was now virtually no one. A ghost town of fun. It was weird. Todd had never seen the place abandoned, per se, let alone driven right through the 400-acre site. He passed the grandstand where horses raced and where rock and country western stars performed, and then veered off to the left. On one side stood a Quonset hut, topped by a steeple which promised the best church breakfast ever, followed by a dark green shack in the shape of a bell pepper, which advertised its fare. Deep fried, of course. And then came the root beer hut and a foot-long chili dog place. Todd took a ride at Tiny Tim Donuts and headed straight down toward a sea of pavement, now completely empty, but which had so recently boasted the mighty Midway, an extravaganza of amusement rides and arcade games. Human beings, of course, weren't the only fair guests. Todd had recently read that something like 10,000 animals also attended, exhibiting and competing for the biggest, the tallest, the fattest, and the fastest of breed. And Todd now entered their territory. Large buildings appeared, marked simply sheep, poultry, swine barn, cattle barn, and finally horses. Glancing down the street, Todd saw that it was totally empty except for one pile of horse manure and an empty black pickup truck. Obviously, he thought as he parked, John Lyman was waiting inside. Not at all pleased with how deserted the area was, Todd grabbed his cellular phone and climbed out. The horse barn was, according to the sign, a WPA building built in 1937 of thick concrete and decorated here and there with small friezes of horses, an odd greenish-beige color with high windows. The building's large main doors were pulled down, and it appeared totally closed for the year. Approaching the structure, however, Todd saw a small door set in an alcove. He pulled open the screen door, tested the wooden door, and found it unlocked. Stepping inside with his phone in hand, he turned a corner and found himself in a huge empty space. Gone were the quarter horses and draft horses, the 4-H exhibits, the breeders, the farm kids, and the straw strewn everywhere. "John," called Todd, peering through the dim, dirty light. "John Lyman?" Taking several steps across the cold concrete, Todd realized he shouldn't have agreed to meet here, not in a place so void of activity. No, he should have been more heads up. Should have insisted they meet in a place full of people. Glancing around the dank building, Todd wondered why John Lyman wanted to meet and just how angry he might be. Hello?" A gust of wind shot into the building. The door slammed shut, and Todd jumped from overhead. Came a deep flurry, a sparrow, perhaps locked in here since the end of the fair, and somehow not yet starved to death. And then finally he heard the soft but distinct shuffle of leather across concrete. Todd turned to a line of wooden stalls along one side of the barn and called. "John." After a long moment, Came more shuffling, and then, "Yeah, down here." Perhaps Todd was a fool. Perhaps he should have just turned and headed out of there. But he didn't really think he had much choice. Andrew Lyman was dead, and the boy's father wanted to talk to him. Either he had news for Todd about his son's death, an overlooked fact, perchance, or he was going to lash out at Todd for his coverage, or maybe, just maybe, John Lyman had sought out Todd for an entirely different reason. Could it be possible that he knew something about his son's involvement with Rawlins? The stalls were made of thick, heavy wood with huge sliding doors and heavy metal bars at the top, perfect for containing the most malcontent of stallions. Approaching the 6th or 7th stall, Todd heard movement from within and cautiously approached the opening. Looking in, he saw the back of a large man standing there as he wiped down something. As Todd's eyes adjusted to the faint light, he saw what John Lyman was attending to. "This isn't the greatest saddle, not by any means," Lyman said, his voice low in pain. "But I won it during my very first cutting competition, something like 20, maybe 23 years ago. It's brought me and my cutting horses good luck all this time. Up until now, I didn't just lose during the competition this year. I was the laughingstock of the whole fucking state. Fair rodeo. I mean, I've just up and lost the knack." "I'm sorry. These are hard times for me. Real hard. Farming sure as hell ain't getting any easier. My family is gone and fallen apart, and now my only boy's dead. Murdered. Because he wore cowboy boots and jeans and a khaki jacket that was obviously too small. Something that had perhaps once fit around him, but would never again. He was a big man, not just tall, but overweight. And between the top of his blue check shirt and his green cap, the skin of his neck was red and aged from years in the field. What could Todd say? How wondered Todd, clutching his phone in his sweaty hand. Could he comfort this stranger? Breaking the silence, John said, "The night I found out my boy was gay was the night I nearly beat him to death. And I would have too, if my wife hadn't stopped me. I was so angry at him. I was so upset. I mean, I failed that boy. I wanted him to be happy and healthy. I wanted him to have a good, decent life. I met him, and he was a good boy. He was happy and healthy, too, and decent. In all his infinite wisdom, Todd couldn't keep his mouth shut. He was all of that, plus gay. Maybe he was, but oh, Lord. I tried. I just didn't want that for him. That life. It's not good, not right. I saw it coming, of course. I knew he was a homo. Knew it years ago, but it's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It's just a matter of fact that your son was gay. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Shit. You know why I beat my boy that night? You know why?" asked John Lyman, turning around for the first time. Todd saw a face that was worn and fallen and eyes that were red and glistening. How much, wondered Todd, had he had to drink? Or, wait, was he not drunk? Were his eyes red with tears? "No," replied Todd. "Why?" "I beat my boy because I was trying to beat out of him what I hated most about myself. That's why." It took Todd a half second to comprehend what he was saying, for he'd never heard someone place their sexuality in so awful a context. But he was saying that, wasn't he? Can you be a little more specific?" "Well, I'm married, but..." He closed his eyes, shook his head. "Let's just say I haven't been faithful to my wife." Todd understood perfectly now. Understood that John Lyman would sooner kill himself than say he was gay. There was obviously no way in hell he was going to say he was homosexual, queer, a fairy, a pansy, a fudgepacker, a cornholer, or whatever the kids these days said so easily. But that not so very long ago all but equaled death, and in fact sometimes still did. John Lyman had lived an isolated life in rural Minnesota, obviously terrified of his personal truth. And that he had said as much as he had to Todd was amazing. Then again, it had taken the death of his son to pry open his closet this much. Still, Todd knew the profound difference between the unspoken and the spoken truth. And so he asked it in as non-threatening a manner as he could, saying, "You mean you've been having a same-sex affair?" Nodding as he stared at the floor of the stall, John Lyman said, "I've been seeing the same guy ever since high school." "Really?" "Not all that much, not really. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Sometimes more." "So, like father, like son. Incredible." But why was he telling Todd this? Because Todd was openly gay? Because he had perhaps witnessed Todd's own outing live on TV? Perhaps. Perhaps even though Todd was a complete stranger, he saw him as an isle of safety, even compassion. After all, didn't we all just want to be understood? "This is obviously a very difficult time for you," said Todd. "Is there anything I can do? Anyway, I can help?" John Lyman nodded, closed his eyes, and said nothing. "How?" asked Todd. "Shit. I wondered if it was really going to come to this, if I could actually go through with it." He sighed deeply, reached into the right pocket of his khaki jacket, and pulled out something small and metal. At first, in the faint light, Todd could only make out a mellow glint of metal. Then he saw something round and long, a barrel. "Hey, wait a minute," said Todd, taking a half step back. This, of course, was what he feared. Something exactly like this. He glanced around, saw nothing. Realized that the only thing he had to defend himself was the stupid phone. "We can talk this out," insisted Todd. "You don't understand. There's nothing to talk about." "You don't have to do it, John. I know these are bad times, but you don't have to hurt anyone. There are other ways." Raising the gun, he said, "Nope, I'm afraid there aren't. I've been thinking and thinking, and I got no choice." "John, wait, please." Todd was worse than a sitting duck. He could make a break for it. He could tear for the door, and perhaps he'd make it. Then again, thought Todd, his heart taking off at a gallop. He probably wouldn't. John Lyman was sure to be a good shot. "Why?" demanded Todd. "Because I can't face it. The truth. But, and if it ever comes out, I want you to go see my wife." "Do what?" "Go see my wife, Martha." Suddenly this wasn't making any sense. Was this perhaps not headed in the very direction that Todd feared? "What do you mean?" Raising the gun higher, Lyman said, "I want you to tell her how much I loved her. Tell her in my heart I was true to her." As Todd watched Lyman's elbow bend, he suddenly understood. Oh, God! He called Todd here for a kind of last confession. "John, don't." "There's no other way. I got no other choice." "Your son's dead. Don't make things worse." Lyman lifted the handgun to his right temple and slowly let his eyes drift shut. "It's all my fault, too. Somehow I made that boy a homo, and I definitely drove him away from his home. He's dead because of me." Tears started rolling from his eyes, big fat drops that traveled down his large cheeks. No, he didn't want this. He really didn't, and Todd knew what he had to do. Just keep talking. "No," said Todd. "He's dead because some insane person killed him. If I hadn't drove him away, he'd still be alive. He should have been home with us. He would have been safe there. None of this would have happened." The other man's trigger finger started to flinch, and Todd knew he'd lost. That there was no way of stopping this, that Andrew Lyman's death was going to be like a chain accident. One death piled upon another, and all for nothing. The phone. There was nothing else. Todd could do no other course, none that he could see, and so, as John Lyman stood there with the pistol to his right temple, Todd slowly brought back his arm. This was perhaps the stupidest thing, but he was determined to do something. Anything to change the course of the next few seconds. Wasting not a moment, Todd tossed the small black phone at the other man. "It's for you, John." John's eyes popped open in surprise, and instinctively, he reached out to catch the little plastic phone, hurtling his away. And catch it, he did, the small phone clattering against the barrel of the gun. Desperate, Todd blurted, If you shoot yourself, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a story on television about you and your son. I'm going to say that Andrew was an incest victim. I'm going to say that you had sex with him. That's not true. Of course it's not. But that's what I'm going to say, and that's what the world will think, because you'll be dead, and you'll have no way of defending yourself. No! I'll do it. If you kill yourself, that's what I'm going to do. Oh, Christ. What was Todd about to unleash? But if you don't hurt yourself, if you push through all of this, then all I'll do is tell the truth. That you loved your... You bastard! Lyman threw Todd's cellular phone to the floor, smashing it in a half-dozen pieces, and then charged forward, a bull of a man overflowing with rage and self-hatred. Todd, seeing the gun aimed at him, leaped to the side, and an instant later a bullet blasted deep into the thick wood of the stall. But rather than running for the door, Todd twisted around and used his foot to trip Lyman just as he came rushing out. Lyman fell forward, landing on the hard concrete floor with a deep groan, and the gun flew from his hand and went sailing through the air. Racing after it, Todd bent down, grabbed the butt of the gun, and scooped it up. "You asshole!" roared Lyman as he scrambled across the floor. "I'm going to kill you!" And just then a hand locked onto Todd's left ankle and pulled with the force of a draft horse. Before Todd knew it, he went flying forward and the gun went hurtling out of his hand. He landed smack on his stomach and all the air exploded out of him. He knew he had to move to get out of there, but he couldn't breathe, couldn't even manage to push himself onto his hands and knees. And the next moment, Lyman was pulling him back. Todd managed to twist over to cover his face as Lyman lunged at him, striking Todd on the chin once, twice. Todd tried to curl into a ball to protect himself, but it was too late. Before he even had time to think, his head exploded with a blast of pain and everything plunged into quiet darkness. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.